right, here we are back in the Bayou Retreats game house with the Scion Esports Founders podcast. You guys just missed some great nostalgia of the good old days of Warzone. Warzone in 2019, and we're talking about maybe making another adventure into Rebirth Island. We'll see what happens after this. But we are not here to talk about Warzone tonight. We are here to talk about hardware and the equipment and the development process and all the things that went into making the video game industry sing throughout the years. I got to get my countdown.
I was wondering about that clock if it was supposed to be doing that.
So we have it. Let's get some introductions here right quick. Of course, you know me. I'm Corey Tarver. I'm the same as I always am. And Eric, we're
also the same as always.
We're gonna pretty much always be here. And we have a special guest with us tonight, Sam Hayes. You might know him in the Discord as RetroReject.
Yes, I'm the old guy of the group, I guess. I've been around for a while.
We were just talking about how old Sam is.
We were just talking
about
how
a little bit older
is.
than us.
Yep. Yeah. I made you I made you like a wizard on the party screen there because you just had a wizard look with your beard and you looked like you were casting a spell.
Just call me Mr. Wizard.
Yeah. So the reason we have you here tonight, Sam, is because your career kind of in the hardware side of IT. You do a lot of computers and networking and stuff, and also your history with going way back to the arcade era.
Yeah.
We just thought you'd be a great person to include in this conversation.
Yeah,
so.
I'm an arcade collector more than a player these days,
Yeah.
So.
And if you don't really know anything about what we're talking about, just pretend. Nobody knows. None of us were alive in the 70s. None of us know what happened back then, so...
I really don't remember. I was only 80s were my 80s my era. So I was born in the 70s. Grew up in the 80s.
The 80s are to you what the 90s are to us.
So you're like literally exactly Stranger Things.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes. That
Nice.
is me.
Like the kids in Stranger Things. That's Sam.
Yep.
Nice. Cool. Okay, so I got, just to kind of give us a heads up, I put reliving the 80s, 90s, and the aughts on the rundown there, but really what we're going to do for the first whole half of the show is we're just going to talk, really going all the way back to the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and talk about the hardware that drove the industry. So what can you tell us, Sam, about the original, like when gaming on a screen became a thing, like the arcade, like the first gen OG arcade life? What was it like?
Bunch of college kids wanting to do something, come up with coding and pumped it out to a screen, and you had like Pong and things like that, just to give them competitiveness and things. Then you moved on to Vector, Asteroids and Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man. Just programmers, it gave them something to do and something to, I'm better at you at this, and then you're better than me at this, and stuff like that.
The unique thing kind of about the arcade era, I think, is kind of the coin op mentality. Like there's now, of course, now we have microtransactions, and it's this big offense to the whole video game industry, microtransactions. But I think arcades kind of was the original microtransaction. Like you literally pay one at a time for the game.
Well, initially you didn't have the pay to plays. Like you didn't have the gauntlet where you put a quarter in and you got extra life and things like that. The original way was you're playing a fighting game and you popping your quarter on the marquee for the next game. You're holding your place.
Yep.
And then it was all King of the Hill style. You won, you stayed on, next person got on, and that's how the arcades were, man. That's how you met friends, made enemies. You had your rivals, all that stuff.
Eric, did you do any homework about the hardware that drove the arcade era?
Well, I didn't do a lot of homework because I try not to do homework, because then I would spend the whole week memorizing everything I could, and then it would be no fun for me.
Yeah.
I did not do any homework. I don't know that arcade hardware stuff.
Hardware wise, you're looking at printed circuit boards, PCBs with IC chips and ROMs and things like that were, basically you had a group of chips that you programmed to run the game. CPU power was not that much, and you had very little bit of memory that you could use, so they had to be creative on how they got things to work.
You're talking about kilobytes of memory.
Yeah.
Kilobytes, and your CPUs were probably less than 1 megahertz, maybe 1 megahertz-ish.
Was every, you're talking about PCBs, like was every arcade, like obviously when they were mass produced, they were just mass produced like any other commodity, but like was every arcade game its own specific design, hardware and software from the ground up, or did they use off the shelf components? Like was there off the shelf processors from IBM or something at the time, or were they how custom was each game? You all know?
It was one of those. I in my experience, there were some, the chips were available, so they built around those, or if they weren't, they would make something. Like jumping to now, you have people recreating those with FPGAs and boards. So like to recreate all those old processors and just to make it more of an authentic feel because you're dealing with. As a collector, you're dealing with equipment that's 30, 40 years old now that is hard to replace.
50,
so you have to come up with a new
50 years old.
Yeah.
30, 40, maybe doing a little bit short.
Yeah, doing a little bit of justice.
So the game designers though, they weren't making hardware.
Right.
They were buying hardware. So like Texas Instruments and Ricoh and Motorola and maybe IBM, but there were Zilog, I think, was a name that I remember from way back then, but they were the arcade companies were buying chips. It wasn't like they didn't manufacture their own chips.
In each game, you were asking if they were all specific and things like that. Each game, there was a basic set of hardware that, like, say, Midway used or Bally used, and they built on that, and then they would do like consoles. You would have like from the NES to the SNES, you had the original PCBs, and you would have a JAMA, then you would have the next level of that, and they kept getting more advanced and advanced as time went on.
But if you had a Pac-Man arcade game, you could get a ROM to change that to a different arcade game.
Well, that's how
within one manufacturer.
That's how Miss Pac-Man was born.
We're kind of talking about this, but Arrow asked, we have some great activity in the chat, by the way.
Look at all this, Sam. They love us.
Yeah, the Shades here. Man, we have never had this much interest before we got Sam.
Let's go.
Yeah, Arrow's asking, could a Pac-Man machine play Tekken? Well,
No.
Tekken was much later.
But within
could a Pac-Man machine play Asteroids?
Well,
or whatever?
what he just said was Miss Pac-Man. So
Yeah.
within one manufacturer, you could get a ROM, some cases, to swap out the game.
And that was back in the day. Yeah, you would get Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, things like that. But now you have people that create daughter boards and stuff like that with the same type of hardware. That I have a Pac-Man machine that plays 100 games based on that hardware. It's just ROM swaps and things like that. So yes, it's with people's knowledge now, it can be done. But back then they weren't thinking about that as much.
Yeah.
So.
But as an arcade, if you owned an arcade, Midway would try to sell you a new ROM or something like that.
They would sell, yeah.
out.
Yeah, if you were the arcade owner.
That would
okay,
definitely.
You had dedicated cabinets, and then you had kits that you could actually pull out the boards of one machine and put new guts into it and create a
the
whole
signs too. You probably swap out the
marquees and the control panels,
and put new decals on or whatever. Yeah. So we're talking about right now is like mid 70s, right? I think
you're looking at early 80s.
Early 80s. Okay, well, because
everything would have been big enough that you could see it. Like that, like back then, you could see. Okay, there's the CPU, and you could hold it, and then you could probably look at traces.
That's
going
how
along.
Everybody's like, "Why do you like working on arcade cabinets?" Because I can actually physically see the traces, and I can solder them. Or you have a cold solder joint that your solder's broken, and you can actually physically touch it and replace it and fix it.
Yeah, and there was different chips for everything. It wasn't all integrated into one tiny little thing.
Yeah, you had sound chips, you had sprite chips, you had everything was separate.
And so the golden age of the arcades was the very late 70s and very early 80s, I think. Because the earliest of the 80s is when the kind of home console revolution happened, when people started, I guess, having the desire to play these video games on their TVs at home, and also, I guess, the hardware companies realizing that it was feasible to mass produce them and sell them in console form. So, early trivia question. I'm just going to give you. We're going to sneak ahead to the trivia a little bit. Does either one of y'all know what the original, very, very, very first commercially marketed home console was?
Astrocade? Bally's Astrocade?
Nope.
Or before that. That was actually multiple cartridge console. But Pong.
Yep.
Or the Telstar.
So I think
So
Pong
those are-
was the first one that ran on a TV. Plug it into a TV. I think Pong may have been the first one of that. But
I don't think it was. Pong was in 1970. I did a little bit of research.
Okay.
Pong was in 1973 because everybody thinks, I thought Pong. Surely it's Pong. In 1972, there was a console called the Magnavox Odyssey.
Magnavox Odyssey. Now that you say it,
And I
that
actually
came out.
have an Odyssey and
Yeah.
I have an Odyssey 2.
now
And
that
the
you say
first-
it,
the
I've
first,
heard of that. We did not have one.
The
I don't
first
wanna pretend we
generation of
did.
Odyssey boasted the ability to display 3 dots and 1 line
Yeah.
of varying length.
Yeah.
That's what the console could display. So
Perfect.
the games had to, and then shortly thereafter was Pong, and then I guess when did the Atari 2600 come out? That's what my first memory of a console, right?
Yeah, I know the order better than I know the years.
Yeah,
You
let's
know, like
see.
we were not alive when an Atari. That was older than us.
I think that was like Uncle Dwayne.
Yeah.
Like was a teenager when the Atari came out. Like that's something.
I don't know that we were even alive when the Nintendo came out.
While you're looking that up, Arrow says, were there issues of the original games where you could see the traces easier to fix than the new issues you may find then? Like if sound went out, would it
Yes.
be easier to find a fix on older machines?
Even
I got
so,
you.
yes.
even
Is it
since,
easier to troubleshoot and trace the problems? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I would say even since we've been alive, it's gotten so much more difficult to troubleshoot hardware problems. You're basically only troubleshooting software problems now. Used to you could go take out a piece and you can't do that anymore in
Yeah,
computers.
I was still able to physically repair like NES systems and SNES systems and things like that because I could trace them and do stuff like that. To answer your question, the 2600 was released September 11th of 1977.
77. Okay, yeah.
So we were negative.
we were
6.
Yeah, we
I
were
was
born in
almost 2.
almost 2. Yeah. So let's talk about we're getting into the early console generations. Let's talk about the video game crash of 1983. Like the consoles that were around and all the games that were around then was like the late 70s and the early 80s, right? So what are the causes and ramifications of the great video game crash of 1983? Do y'all know anything about that?
Well, one of the main causes was a mass flooding of garbage software. That was one of the games not being good and the industry being flooded with garbage software was one of the main causes. That's why Nintendo got real protective of
Their IP?
when they came out with all their brands. They were very protective of this is going to be a Nintendo product and it's going to be a quality product.
Yeah,
We were not alive then. I only know what I have read.
Wasn't the NES kind of like
I think it single-handedly
got
the
us
industry
out of
the
the
video
kind of
game
the
crash.
depression.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, just the quality of the games and the graphics compared to everything else. Well, honestly, the 5200 had decent, same quality. It was just, Nintendo knew what they were doing and they did it well.
So the 8-bit consoles, of course, now we're to the point where the difference in only Sam is alive,
Right.
And
We were
now
then
all
alive.
3 of us are
Yep.
alive. So the NES console, like we remember an Atari, but we didn't get an Atari. We didn't have Atari already was around, but we got an NES. I remember having an NES.
The first console I actually had, besides we had a TI-99 4A, which was a computer, but then the first console I actually had was an Arcadia, which is kind of the same as like the Magnavox, the Odyssey 2 era, stuff like that. And then I bought myself a Sega Master System. I was a Sega guy back then.
Sega Master System was the 8-bit.
I have no memory of Sega Master
We don't
System.
either.
I've never
We
seen
looked
one.
it
I
up
wouldn't
and
recognize it.
We were talking with Dustin about it and looking up some games and stuff, but we got some guys that obviously know the history because we got Shade and Arrow are talking about ET. Shout out
ET
to my
was
homies
bad.
in the ET
Oof.
landfill, which is there may or may not
the
be a
worst
trivia
game of
question
all
about that,
time?
but
Yeah, like
literally the
legendarily
worst game of all time.
But you got to
Yes,
realize there are worse games than ET. Trust me.
That ET Atari game is famous for. It's more famous
Yeah.
for being just pallet loads of the game being buried in the Arizona desert.
And now they found them. They went and dug them all up and everything else.
And I think that's kind of like the iconic, image of the video game crash.
Yeah.
Is there's so much crap on the shelves that nobody wants to buy.
Well, the dot-com bubble was
anything.
kinda the same
Dot-com
way.
bubbles came the same
So
way.
much junk out there.
Cannot do anything with this. We just have to go find a place to dig a hole and bury it.
Well, and I remember getting games at like the drugstore. You know, they were just everywhere. K&B,
end of the shelf,
Eckerd's.
there's a little video game there.
Okay, so 8-bit console era. What does 8-bit mean?
So from here on out, you're gonna have to tell me shut up.
Okay.
Because like I could do
Hey,
this.
I appreciate that because I have them all, but I
could.
Yeah.
I could go for 1,000 years.
We'll start going. Let's just talk about what is that? What is that? Because for like 15 years, it was always the 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit. We don't say that anymore, but like, what did it mean?
First of all, it's a marketing term, just like for a while megahertz was a marketing term, and now process technology is a marketing term. So nanometers is now, it doesn't really mean anything. But what it basically meant is the size of either the communication bus of the CPU or the size of the registers in the CPU. The registers are where the processor actually stores the data it's actually working on. So it's like even closer in than memory or cache. The registers are all the way in, as close as they can be. So if they were 8 bits wide, the CPU could operate on 8 bits at a time. That's an 8-bit processor. 16 bits wide, it's a 16-bit processor. You could also have, like, you could have a 32-bit processor, but it could only have an 8-bit or a 16-bit address bus or memory bus, which would, that's why I say it's a marketing term.
That's it. The Atari Jaguar was one of those, like that.
That's why I say it's a marketing term, because, like, well, which one is it?
Right.
So you have this 32-bit CPU with an 8-bit memory or address bus. Which one is it?
Yeah, you're not going to advertise your bottleneck.
Right.
You're going to advertise your highest number.
And everybody associates 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit with graphics.
Yeah.
That's the games were, to me, the sweet spot was SNES and Genesis.
16-bit.
That 16-bit.
Dude,
No doubt.
that is
No
the stuff.
doubt.
Even on arcades, that was the.
But in the Nintendo, the registers were 8-bit, and I think it was pretty much all the communication in the Nintendo was basically 8-bit.
Yeah.
It's tiny. Like 8 bits is it's tiny. There's not a lot of data there, and I think the Nintendo had like maybe a kilobyte of RAM. I think it had 2 kilobytes of RAM for the CPU.
Yeah.
It wasn't. Everything had its own RAM at that time.
How did I want to talk about this? It's kind of probably sets itself up to go through to the modern era where the music is more traditionally what we'd expect to hear, even like on the radio. Like now, the sound in modern games is no different than what you'd hear in a movie or on the radio. But how did the sound of these games work at the time? It's all MIDI programming, right?
Nope, it's all MIDI programming.
I'm not sure that those Nintendo and back are even MIDI. I think they were like a audio wave at this frequency.
Yeah.
Like I think the audio processing was just like a DAC to send it out to the TV. I think it was literally like play noise at the
this tone at this. It
I
wasn't
don't
even
think there was like MIDI. You have a voice. You have a. I think it's called a voice.
Yeah,
it sounds
voice.
like this.
Right. Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah,
like
voice,
this.
yeah.
Sounds like this. But I think on the Nintendo and back, it was like make a buzz at this frequency, and you make music with
different buzzes.
the same buzzes or different buzzes at different frequencies. I think.
Yeah, I can't think of what's the like. I keep thinking oscilloscope, but that's not the right word. But a machine that just generates a tone. There, like you just turn the knob and it generates a tone.
Oh yeah,
you can do that with an oscilloscope.
Yeah, and that's like
toner.
so what you're saying is
a tone generator.
Yeah.
See, in the oscilloscopes that I think of as doing vector graphics for the older arcade cabinets as well. That's why I think of oscilloscope, because you could produce those on the oscilloscope.
Yeah.
A really nice oscilloscope, by the way, is very expensive.
Yeah.
Like many thousands of dollars for a good oscilloscope.
But then when you get into the Nintendo, or at least by Super Nintendo and forward, it's just more typical MIDI that we're familiar with now.
Because Super Nintendo had great music.
Yeah.
It was definitely good MIDI songs with voices and those kind of things.
And it's like, so like
Nintendo
the console could play, like the cartridge would come with a list of voices and also like the MIDI tablature or whatever, and the console could access a certain number of those at a time and play back a certain number of them at a time or something like that.
So everything had a different processor for everything. So the Super Nintendo would have had an audio processor that was separate from the main processor, and would have an audio RAM, and it would be how many sounds can you fit at a time into this audio RAM, and that would be loaded off the cartridge. And then I don't know what the number is, but it would only be able to play a certain number of sound effects at the same time. So like 4 or 8 or something, number of sound effects at the same time.
So let's go back to 8-bit right quick for a second, because we skipped over it pretty quickly, and you are a Mega System guy, right? So we don't know anything about the Sega Mega System. We are NES all the way, but we
got to talk about the.
I'm sorry, the Sega Master System. Mega. I'm thinking I got
the Mega
confused. It's
Drive.
the Mega Drive in Japan.
We got to talk about the
whatever,
Nintendo loading like this, but go ahead.
Yeah. So take us back for a second to the Master System, and what other consoles were there in the 8-bit generation? Like, what else came out of the video game crash?
Nintendo,
other than
NES.
Well, Atari still had. Atari was still in the game with the 5200. That was that was an 8-bit.
Was that when there was a Commodore 64 PC? Was that the
Yeah.
Commodore 64? That was like a PC kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe around that time.
Notable ones. That's about it.
So what about the Master System? What was it like? What games were on it? How did it perform? How did it feel?
Well, I saw Shade. Shout out to Alex Kidd. Yeah, that was a good series. That was one of the.
I don't know what that is.
But of course, you had Sonic. Sonic was the.
Was there a Sonic
on the Master System?
Or was he for Sega Genesis only?
It was a Genesis, but I want to say there was one.
I don't know. You could pretend there was, and we would.
Let's
believe
say
we would believe
sure,
you,
but
we would absolutely believe you.
So did the games go into the Master System like this?
Well, the Master System the Master Systems came with a built-in game,
Okay.
so you actually could power it on and actually have.
Hey,
a game
Shade
to
says
play.
there was a Fantasy Star on the Master
There
System.
was a
And
Fantasy
he says
Star.
there was a Sonic on the
Yeah, I
Master System.
played Fantasy Star was my intro to RPGs.
I
so
remember
yes.
3 and 4 were awesome.
Yeah,
games.
I
don't
did
remember
Fantasy Star 1 and 2. Yeah,
Yeah.
we would. Oh, yeah. But I just squirreled. Oh yeah,
You were
Yeah,
talking
no,
I was
how
asking
the
about how the-
cartridges
and then
loaded.
actually-
it came with the game.
it came with the game, and it had cards, so you could actually put so you had cartridges and you had smaller games that you could fit in the front of it as well. But yes, they were on top. Unlike the Nintendo. Where
So
you
the
push and
Nintendo,
click.
what I wanted to mention about the Nintendo is the Famicom in Japan, it loaded like that. So the ROMs, what are you looking at?
Juana Tarver's in the chat.
All right. Hey, Mom. Hi, Mom.
Oh, what?
So the cartridges on these old systems, the cartridges loaded in, and you're actually, speaking of cartridges, you're actually completing the computer. It's not like the Nintendo Switch is a memory card. You load the game off the memory card. It wasn't like that. You're completing the computer when you put that in there. It's parts of the computer exist on the cartridge. Anyway, so the Famicom, the games went in like this. And the Master System, all that, they went in like this. But for the Nintendo, they wanted it to look like a VCR because Americans were comfortable with VCRs, and that's the way VCRs loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Okay.
wanted it to look like something that Americans were comfortable with, and so they made this contraption for it to load like this. And so
Really?
you put it in, you put the cartridge in like this, and then you push it down, and it locks into place. And they called it zero insertion force, but it was like a little bit of insertion force. And then the on the cartridge, it was like metal things like this that it like went in between, and they bent a little bit. And so, anyway, I think you were alluding to it earlier. That's a disaster.
Yeah.
It was a disaster.
Oh, yeah.
They worked. I'm not saying they didn't work. They worked, but the other ones worked forever, and the Nintendo ones would slowly degrade over time.
Yeah.
And that's when we got into this blow-in thing. And Nintendo long ago had long since said, do not blow into them because moisture is one of the things that damages them. So when you go, you're making it
You're
worse
actually making
by
it
getting
worse.
spit
See,
all over it.
And
You remember what were some tricks? You remember any tricks to get it to load? You remember?
oh
Well,
my God, you would
yeah.
push it all the way and pull it out a
Push it
little
in and
bit.
get it where it was
little bit,
just
right.
barely
That's
touching
the
the
one
front.
I was gonna think of.
And like if it
Yeah.
clicked down and hit the front a little
To
bit.
where it was
that's
just
Yeah,
all-
it
that's
would,
perfect.
it would push it a little bit further in.
Yeah.
But actually, I repaired so many NESs. They actually made an angled insertion, like it was just a single bloop, and it was it.
And then very, very, very later, there was a Nintendo that loaded.
They
from
did
the
make
top.
a
right.
like
That
a
was
second
more like a
gen
Famicom.
that was just.
But
yeah.
that whole blow on them, and then
Yeah.
and then you could just do it again and again and again and again and
Yeah.
again.
But the catch is, even with that though, even without the cartridges, if we want to jump up to the 32-bit real quick, Sony, you had the same thing. It was like, oh, come on, please. Because your optical drives, the lasers would go bad
Yeah.
on them. So it's like, oh, man,
There's always been hardware for
Oh,
things.
yeah.
But anyway, so back to it being a part of the computer, so it won't boot without the ROM. Now I didn't know that about Master System.
The Master System,
It
yeah.
would boot. So
It would
without
boot
the
without
game.
it,
But the
yeah.
Nintendo and stuff wouldn't boot without the cartridge.
Yeah,
so
white,
you get this
black.
black screen.
White,
right.
black.
That's right.
White, black.
And that's the computer. It doesn't. It's not even all there.
Yeah.
It's like half of its brain is not even there. So
Yeah.
you get the cartridge in, and then it'll boot. But
Well, that's
so many of those flashing white screens, and then the little red light would blink on and off.
Yeah.
Let me get it out, put it in again.
Yep.
Then you get the green. Oh, you know.
Such good memories.
Yeah.
All right. Get it just right.
Yeah. So, okay. We're moving forward.
Okay.
We're going to
Gotta move
16-bit era because that's
You
where
know what
we
this
live.
is? What is it?
Hey.
It's Toe Jam and Earl.
Toe Jam and Earl.
Oh my God.
Toe Jam and Earl rocking it.
See, that's a Genesis game. That's
It
you
is.
know,
Yeah. Okay. So
I could also talk about the 16-bit for 1,000
yeah.
years. 1,000
So
years.
the 16-bit is really where we talked about this on an episode a few episodes back about really the OG console wars. Like by the time the Genesis and the Super Nintendo came out, it was like they were absolutely competitors. So let's talk a little bit about the uniqueness. We don't have to just talk. I mean, there was other ones too. There was Neo Geo. We talked about. There was
TurboGrafx 16, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Neo Geo.
Yeah, that was
and TurboGrafx 16 was a complete dud, I think. No, I'm not saying. I mean,
in US,
commercially,
in US
I'm
and
talking
commercially,
about
yes.
the commercial success of
But-
it was not there.
Library wise, it's up there with Nintendo, and honestly, to me, some of the best shooters are on the TurboGrafx 16.
Well, maybe,
I like those.
yeah.
I like the site like G Darius and like R-Type and stuff like that. Those type of shooters are a dime a dozen on
And then the
TurboGrafx.
Neo Geo. One thing I did research for this, actually, it was for the last one we did with the consoles. What happened with Neo Geo? Why know? Did you ever have a Neo Geo?
Yeah, I have a.
Now you do, but when you were a kid.
I saw one and I could not afford it
That's
because of the price. of it.
exactly
That's a segue,
right. Okay,
yeah.
so I saw one and I went back and looked, and they
And
were $699
Back in the
Right,
80s,
which
and
is the
it's-
equivalent of over $1,500 right now. So you're
Yeah.
looking at a Nintendo, but it's $1,500, and the games would be the equivalent of almost $600
a piece, yeah.
for a game.
Wow.
And
the
it was
AES
like,
system. Yeah,
it was like unbelievable how expensive it was, and the reason is it was actually like literally a duplicate of the arcade. Consoles.
Exactly,
Like
yeah.
you play the exact same games. It's just like they had to put and this I don't remember this. I did this research before the thing. They had to put preventative measures in there where you weren't just using the game commercially and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was literally the exact same games, but $1,500.
which it's an adapter. You know, there's an adapter now that yeah.
It'd be like now that you know what that's like now. It's like buying that freaking Apple headset that's like $4,000 for that Apple headset. That's what it'd be like. It's
Or
just-
like, you know, buying the PlayStation, just the controller, the PlayStation. Oh crap! It's the little control. It's just for the PlayStation 5. It's a PlayStation. It's got the controller and the screen, and it's just for streaming through your PlayStation 5.
I
It's
don't know
like-
what you're talking about.
Really?
Yeah.
yeah.
Hold on.
But anyway, it's out of reach. So the reason it wasn't successful is not because it wasn't good. It wasn't successful because it was just so unbelievably out of reach.
Shade says any kid who said they had a Neo Geo was just automatically assumed to be a liar. Nobody had one.
We did not know anyone.
yeah.
We would see every once in a while you'd see a commercial for it. Like that Bonk game was Bonk on Neo Geo.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. Well, okay. I remember
Bonk
that.
was on. Yeah, it was also on TurboGrafx
Was
too.
it? Anyway, we didn't have one because they were so unbelievably expensive, and I didn't realize that until I went and looked it up. But that's the 4 players. But the only really real players are
Yeah.
Nintendo and Sega.
Okay,
Super
so
Nintendo.
Genesis versus SNES, like, what were what were they trying to make their niche be? We talked about their marketing niche about Nintendo being for the family and Genesis being kind of the hipper, cooler,
Well,
like edgier one. But like,
and
what
also
about
sports. Sega did a lot better game.
Sega did a lot
better
more
with
sports, and we
yeah.
talked about arcade ports. So went to Sega a lot more. But like,
Mm-hmm.
what were their technological niches? Were there any different philosophies from the technical side? The one thing that I can't thought up that I wanted to ask about was about the Sega releasing like a new console or a new upgrade of the console, like
When
all
they had-
throughout from the late '80s to the late '90s. Like it was just a new console every
They had
year.
3 iterations of the Genesis. You know, 1, 2, and 3, and then they went on to the Saturn.
Well, no.
You missed the
There was
code.
a
Whoa,
Sega
whoa, whoa.
Genesis,
The
there was a-
32X.
That's right. Then the
Sega
Sega
CD.
CD. So
and
there
then-
was a Sega, and there was like a refurbished Sega.
Yeah,
Then
they
a
had-
Sega CD, then a Sega 32X, and then
See, that to me, that's all that's all part of you know.
right. But that's what he means. It's like
Yeah.
bam, bam, bam,
Yeah.
bam, bam,
And
bam.
it was all, and then the catch is they made them separate consoles, and they made add-ons for the original. You know,
Yeah, and then the Dreamcast. No,
No.
the Saturn, and then the Dreamcast, right?
Sega Saturn, then
Yeah.
Sega Dreamcast,
And
yeah.
the Dreamcast was like mid, like that was like 92 or 93.
And to me,
or
that
something,
the
I think.
Dreamcast was probably like for the SNES for Nintendo. The Dreamcast is that for me on the Sega side.
Yeah.
and none of those were commercially successful. But okay, so
Yeah, so Sega after the Genesis, like they were just digging it, like just reaching.
Yeah.
So Nintendo, you mentioned this earlier. Nintendo emphasized heavily the developers to add on hardware in the cartridge.
Yep.
Not that Sega couldn't do that. There was Virtua Fighter or something like that, where they advertised that, this is a new. It's a what they call it, expansion enhancement chip.
Well, and the catch is
Enhancement chip.
not
On the SNES or on Genesis?
On Genesis.
On Genesis.
But on Nintendo, there was like dozens or many of these enhancement chips. The Super FX chip is the one that everybody knows.
Yeah,
Star
that's the one from
Fox.
Star Fox and
That racing game.
Yeah,
cruising.
what was
no,
that 3D? It was,
like the big monster truck and the little
Stunt Race.
Stunt
Race
Race
FX. Yeah.
Anyway, so the Super FX chip. So Nintendo like really pushed that big time, and their ROMs got bigger and bigger and bigger as they went on, the ROM sizes, and they had these enhancement chips. There wasn't just the Super FX chip though. A lot of the later games had enhancement chips, and there were some really late games that had enhancement chips just to compress the data. So the ROM could be much bigger than the storage capacity of the cartridge, and so it has a compressor in the cartridge. Like I think like Star Ocean was like very, very late in. And then the other famous thing I know about enhancement chips is there's like 20 or 30 games late in Super Nintendo. Super Mario RPG is one of them, where the enhancement chip was like basically more powerful than the Super Nintendo. So like it had the Rico CPU in the Super Nintendo. The enhancement chip was like one of those that operated twice as fast.
Yeah.
Because it was so much newer than. You're talking about many, many years after.
Right.
So you pop in Mario Legend of the Super Mario RPG, and there's a chip going in with the cartridge that's more powerful than the CPU that's running it.
And it was but the console was designed for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm
it was
saying.
made-
Like
yeah.
because they knew
Nintendo
that
pushed
we
it
don't
heavily.
want to spend a bunch of money on a processor that's going to be out of date 3 years from now.
That's exactly right.
So
They
designed
looked longevity
the
of their systems. And
like the
which-
cartridges had like empty pins on them.
Yep.
And the developers could
there
just
was
put whatever
more,
co-processors
well,
in they wanted.
Well,
to.
there was more pins
Yeah.
if they had an enhancement chip. So
Yeah.
the dock had more slots.
Yeah.
For like maybe it was 32 pins.
Yeah.
But if there were no enhancement chips, it only had 16
Yeah.
pins. And Nintendo designed the enhancement chips sometimes, and they would lease them out to whoever. And then also some third parties would design their own enhancement chips. Some games would be like it would only be like 2 games from one manufacturer had its own chip in there.
Yeah.
But that the Super FX chip was the famous one, and then the other big one that I was talking about was just called something simple like Super Accelerator 1, and like 30 or 40 games used that one.
There was one that when I was doing a little bit of reading, they had audio coprocessors and all kinds of other things. But one of them was like they had a math coprocessor that was specifically just for drawing like vector shapes, like diamonds and triangles and circles. And like the one that came up in my mind was like in Chrono Trigger, there's a lot of geometric patterns in the magic spells, like Delta Force that draws a
that was
kind of a
almost
bespoke
certainly a
triangle,
coprocessor doing
right?
that.
And it was a math coprocessor to draw those shapes, and then like Luminaire had this dome shape, and those were all. There was a specific geometric shape coprocessor for those types of art, that's pretty cool.
They would they also would have their own RAM on the cartridge, so everything had its own RAM. So if there's a coprocessor on the cartridge, it would have a 2 kilobyte or 4 kilobytes of RAM on the cartridge, and then the famous thing they all had is battery backed up. Battery backed up RAM for saving things, which I don't think Nintendo did, because Zelda you could say
NES from their very beginning.
It did.
Mm-hmm. And even throughout the 16-bit, they had some games that did and some games that didn't.
Yeah.
Like you had some games that from early on.
Well, Mega Man, you would type in
type in a password.
You type in your code,
code with all the different logos or whatever. But then there also were games where you could save it on the cartridge. So I remember one of the most traumatic memories of my childhood was we had a Chrono Trigger save game that's like some kid came in that was like there for a church event or whatever, spending the night and
ruined it,
saved his game
over
from level 1 over all 5 saves or whatever.
Yeah, classic.
But those games, those batteries would last like forever. You could pop a game in that you hadn't played in years, and
I bet now they probably wouldn't work,
Yeah.
but they would work forever and ever and ever.
But see now you have the issue of the battery probably leaked and killed your PCB.
Yeah.
So the Genesis. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Well, the Genesis they didn't like not allow that, but they didn't emphasize it. They weren't quite as forward thinking. That's why at the end of the Sega, they're thinking, oh, our next thing's not ready yet, but these guys are doing so much better. Let's get something out.
Let's get
this CD
Yeah.
thing out. And then, let's release Sega CD. And it just wasn't quite, it didn't have the development, strength there.
And what did Sega end up doing? They got rid of their hardware and went straight to software.
Yeah. After 2 or 3 bad consoles, they said we're just going to be a third-party publisher.
Sega Genesis did one thing they needed, which is it got them some IP that Sonic the Hedgehog is still. My kids love Sonic the Hedgehog, and that's because it was successful in Sega Genesis.
Let's talk about this transition from cartridges to optical discs, because
The Nintendo PlayStation.
right, the Nintendo PlayStation, they were supposed to be not even the 64 for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
They were supposed to be in development in like the mid '90s. There was supposed to be a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo, right?
Yeah, it was discussed.
And we were talking about that before the podcast started, about how it was either E3 or something, how it started the beginning of it, and if you want to...
Nintendo was in discussion with Sony about cooperating on a disc, a CD-based game, and then I think it was Philips.
Yeah.
So like they started E3 and they let Sony do a presentation about this thing that's going to be the Nintendo, Sony, PlayStation, and then during E3, Nintendo announced, we're not going with Sony, we're going with Philips.
Yeah.
And so Sony like announced before the whole world, and then Nintendo was like, screw you guys, we're going with somebody else. And they let them, like, I guess they went into E3 knowing this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And that's pretty that's turning the knife after it's already in.
Yeah. Well, and then Sony got the last laugh though, because they
Turns
said
out
y'all can suck it.
turns
We're gonna
out
make the
Sony
PlayStation.
is not that weak of a company.
Yeah,
Like,
we're just gonna. That's fine. We'll just take the PlayStation. We'll make it our own.
Well,
and then it's we'll go on to be one of the most
PlayStation
storied
and
consoles.
PlayStation 2 were probably the most dominant consoles ever in the history.
And then
of any
if you look
console.
at
It was a one-player
they went
game
with
for a while
Philips,
there,
and
yeah.
Philips CDI was a dead console.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Amiga 32.
Sam brought up Philips CDI.
Right.
I mean, yes. So CDI question. First of all, do you remember any games from the CDI? Because the CDI, Philips CDI, was
Yes,
kind of
there-
like the PlayStation.
I actually remember the Nintendo game, the Zelda games on the.
Do you remember the Zelda
that's
games?
right,
Okay, because
yeah.
it was kind of an evolution out of that fight with Sony. It was like Nintendo was negotiating with Sony to build their CD platform for the Super Nintendo, and they couldn't really work it out. And then they decided we're going to go to Philips, and then they really kind of ran out of time also, and it ended up Sony making their own CD, game platform, the PlayStation, and then Philips said, well, we have this thing that we developed. We were going to license it to Nintendo, but we're not going to now, so we might as well just release it as our own, Philips CDI. So do you remember any other games other than the...
Well, see, and I get the CDI and the 3DO mixed up. So
Yeah.
and they had like Sewer Shark and.
Sewer Shark was on the Sega CD.
and it might have been both.
But it was on both of
or
them.
it might have
right?
been 32X.
And they even had it was
Sega
to
CD.
me more of
32X.
the CDI and the 3DO stuff. The CDI stuff actually had it in schools. They had educational stuff on
Yep.
it, and I remembered more of the movie, almost choose your own adventure
That's
type
how
game.
all
you
that's
know.
what Philips the CDI was very much a choose your own adventure type. It was these animated. It was full motion video games
Yeah.
where you're watching the movie and at some point you have to press this button or else your guy dies. We
Yeah.
remembered Revenge of the Ninja,
Yeah.
and I thought Dragon's Lair was CDI. Revenge of the Ninja, Ground Zero Texas.
Oh my
Night
God! I
Trap,
totally forgot
Night
about
Trap,
Ground
those
Zero
were all
Night
Sega
Trap, yeah,
CD
see,
games.
yeah.
And I thought Dragon's Lair was the kind of killer app for Philips CDI. And
Turns
by
out
killer
there
app, I
was
mean
no
only
killer
app.
app,
Turns out there was no killer app because it was a major flop console. But
Yeah.
that was a very, very tumultuous time making that transition from cartridges to CD-ROMs. Nintendo, they said, screw that, we ain't doing that. We're sticking on cartridges for a whole other generation.
Yep.
So
and then they went with the
little half disc.
the half disc, yeah, the
So
GD-ROMs.
the Nintendo 64 was sort of a cooperative development cycle with Silicon Graphics, SGI, which is like when we were little. Silicon Graphics was like the famous name in 3D, and Nintendo said we're going to stick with cartridges because we don't. Basically, we all agree. Nintendo said we don't want load times. These load times are ridiculous. Copying all this stuff off the disc is intolerable. We're not going to do it. We're going to stick with what we know. Stick with the cartridges. Then there was a plan to make a disc drive for the Nintendo 64, but later,
When they
it
had
wound
the
up
DD
sticking with-
drive, which was
I think it was just
technology.
in Japan. Was it just in Japan?
Yeah, it was just in
Right.
Japan.
Yep.
So Nintendo stuck with cartridges. famously everybody knows, somebody mentioned in the chat, Squaresoft says we're not doing that. PlayStation's where Squaresoft is going because they wanted the videos and the music and all that stuff. Like they wanted you to actually be able to like have like voices, music and stuff like that.
They were pretty like Squaresoft, and they kind of told Nintendo to suck it. Really, like they were pretty ballsy because they were coming off of like 1991 Final Fantasy IV, 1992 Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, not that great. 1993 Secret of Mana.
Right.
1994 Final Fantasy 3 to us, Final Fantasy 6. 1995 Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
So Square says we're the stuff, Nintendo, and it was kind of a battle of the titans, I think. But Nintendo kind of said, yeah, well, I guess y'all can go, and Square said we're gonna go.
Yeah.
So actually, I found out Secret of Mana was in development during that negotiation. By the time Chrono Trigger was extremely early in development, but it was in development. But it was early. It was late enough that they didn't not know if they were going to have a CD-ROM attachment or not. They knew it was just going to be a cartridge, so they designed it to play the best they could on the cartridge. Secret of Mana was being designed while they thought they were going to have a CD-ROM, and so they thought they were going to have all this extra storage space. So they designed the game was like 3 times bigger than it ended up being. And then they had to say, well, we're never going to get that CD-ROM, so we have to slash like 60% of our game.
And everybody's like, oh yeah, everybody loves Final Fantasy. I love Final Fantasy, but honestly, I love Legend of Mana, Secret of Mana. I love that series. Even when,
The fact that we could play 3 players on that was like we played the heck out of it.
Dude, super multi-tap.
Like a multi-tap, you know? Okay, so back to Nintendo 64.
Nintendo 64, yeah.
It was actually, so Nintendo is a great product. The Nintendo 64 was a great product. It didn't have the development strength. I don't know if maybe it was really complicated to develop for, but it was a very, very powerful CPU. I think it was roughly equivalent to like a Pentium, like about that time. It was like 100 megahertz. Like if you remember back to like a Pentium, like the first Pentium, that's about how powerful the CPU in the Nintendo 64 was. It had a lot of processing power. It was like one of the first consoles. It was the first console that could really do 3D graphics that are properly like what's the right words? Bilinear and trilinear filtering, and not just all the textures jaggy. The texture on the PlayStation looked really, really bad.
Yeah.
Right. There were 3D models and everything, but if you remember the textures on the PlayStation, it was nasty, blocky, terrible looking textures. No.
Lara Croft, come on now, she was amazing on
with
there.
her big trapezoidal boobs.
Not only were the models simple, but the textures were also bad.
Yeah, they were.
The mid-mapping was really
on the Nintendo
bad.
64,
They were smooth. They
had great filtering and like the mip-mapping, trilinear filtering, all that stuff didn't even exist on PlayStation. So it's just nearest neighbor, whatever the worst interpolation you could do was. That's what PlayStation was doing. Nintendo, it would have been a lot better, but there just wasn't the development strength behind it. And I think the other thing was, I don't think Nintendo realized how important. So like Nintendo Mario, right? Mario doesn't need a lot of textures. It's a cartoon.
Yeah.
It doesn't need a lot of complex textures. PlayStation and Squaresoft, they went totally the other way with all these super complicated textures. I think Nintendo kind of missed the mark on, they have all this 3D rendering capacity, but they didn't allow the developers to have the complex textures that PlayStation had when they could have run them.
Yeah.
It could have run them and looked
great.
A lot better.
Well, like, Perfect Dark, GoldenEye.
Perfect Dark, those games were fantastic.
Yeah.
They were great games. Now, Perfect Dark, you could make that game run so bad.
Dude,
like,
yeah.
We used to do 4 of us against
you would load up
8
eight
Dark Sims.
You could
4
make it
players
run
versus 8
so
Dark Sims.
bad.
Like, you get like 5 frames per second, maybe.
But anyway, I think so. Nintendo designed the Nintendo 64 with Mario in mind. So like the texture memory was like so tiny, you couldn't even have a complex texture, even though it could render the heck out of it, and it could look all sharp, not sharp, smooth, pleasant. The texture memory was so small.
Yeah.
The texture memory was so small you couldn't even have good textures. Whereas in PlayStation, you had this big, huge texture memory, but it couldn't render it well.
It looked great on their IP.
And it could get the frames out. It could make the frames, but it didn't look as clear. It looked jaggy and blocky, and that's what we remember about Lara Croft and like Parasite Eve. You remember these? It's like, and even Final Fantasy VII, like Cloud looks good in Final Fantasy VII because then they didn't have really complex textures.
Yeah.
When you went to Final Fantasy VIII, they have these huge texture
Really
maps,
dirty textures.
and it looks terrible, right? So Nintendo 64 was more powerful, but Nintendo didn't quite have it dialed in for the non-cartoons.
And honestly, it really didn't matter.
They had great games though.
Yeah,
Well,
like
that's
Siphon Filter
Nintendo
and the Metal Gear series back in the day, they were bad to look at, but they were fun games.
Right.
You know.
As long as the games were fun, it really didn't matter.
Yeah.
Yep.
On both sides.
Yeah.
But the Nintendo 64 was a really, really powerful piece of hardware, and it just didn't quite have it dialed in right from a developer standpoint.
Yep. Okay, we're running. We're this is like like I told you, Sam. We're just going to talk and we're going to keep
Well,
talking.
then this may be part one of a multi.
part one of 10.
Yeah.
One of 10. I was telling Eric, I think our podcast's niche is history. You know, talking about, because we're gamers, we've been gamers the whole entire time, and our niche is kind of like relating all the history to today. So
And we talked about before the podcast started. We talked about the microtransactions and stuff like that could be a total podcast by itself on all that stuff.
about the economics of how
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a 2-minute break. I gotta get a drink of water. We're gonna take a quick break. Stay with us in the stream if you're in the chat. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys. Stay with us. We're gonna be back in just a couple minutes.
Drop questions.
Yeah, drop some questions if you want to. We're gonna come back and talk for a few more minutes about hardware, and then we may hit Helldivers or we may not. But I got a lot of trivia. We may just skip Helldivers and go straight to the trivia because I have some awesome trivia for
bangers.
Yeah, I got some real bangers. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
You doing okay? And I enjoyed this.
Very aggressive bomb. Picks up two. Yeah, gonna go ahead and get two. Lewis looking really strong in this res coming up. Diva got res outside of her mech. I don't hear that. Incredibly fast build. Only 86% for the Ioway Ryan. He did pin the Ioway Ryan, so that has a lot of healing and a decent amount of damage there that he just pushed to a hold by using his Earth there. They're already back at 28% also. Absolutely incredible play from Ryan. Head on that one. Diva bomb comes out, but Lewis is at the point. It looks like Iowa is at the point, but it looks like a Shadow's going to come out to pick up those last couple Iowa players sitting there. 5 seconds left. It's so close. It looks like Lewis is going to actually go ahead and get this hold here. Going to go ahead and push forward. Iowa is going to let them have that first kill. Kind of opt to fight a little further back. Got the winner. Comes to nerve. Very aggressive bomb. Picks up two. Yeah, gonna go ahead and get two. Lewis looking really strong in this res coming up. Diva got res outside of her mech. I don't hear that. Incredibly fast build. Only 86% for the Ioway Ryan. He did pin the Ioway Ryan, so that has a lot of healing and a decent amount of damage there that he just pushed to a hold by using his Earth there. They're already back at 28% also. Absolutely incredible play from Ryan. Head on that one. Diva bomb comes out, but Lewis is at the point. It looks like Iowa is at the point, but it looks like a Shadow's going to come out to pick up those last couple Iowa players sitting there. 5 seconds left. It's so close. It looks like Lewis is going to actually go ahead and get this hold here. Going to go ahead and push forward. Iowa is going to let them have that first kill. Kind of opt to fight a little further back. Got the winner. Comes to nerve. Very aggressive bomb. Picks up two. Yeah, going to go ahead and get two. Lewis looking really.
That year, which
All right, we're back. Thank y'all for waiting. I needed to get some water. I needed to take a little break, but we're gonna pick it up where we left off. During the break, we brought up something that we want to talk about that we kind of missed. And that's one of the things on my rundown, which is like how were games developed and how was the coding done. Miles, if Miles was watching, he would love it. He said, "Dad, I want to learn to code. When can I start learning to code? I want to learn coding."
Tell him now.
And
So
even
now-
and
now's
even
the
with
time,
that
so-
now is it's like my
Yeah.
kid, my son back in the day was the same way. Oh, I want to be a computer guy because I want to. And they're playing games. I want to do this.
Yeah.
No, it's a totally different. You have to learn a program.
So
like
before
anything
we
else,
move
if it's your
on,
job, it's not fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
once
Ceases
it's
to
your
be
job, it's
fun
not
when it
fun.
becomes
Well, and
your job.
actually, if you have another one, I have one of my friends is a game developer, and he's out of Baton Rouge, and he could sit here and talk about.
We could remote in a developer. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So all the way from the back, from the originals to now, like how are these games? If you were writing these games, not the hardware, the software, how did it work?
So back all the way back, it was assembly language. Which what assembly language means is you're still writing mnemonic. You still write load and store and stuff like that, but you're talking the language that the CPU actually executes. So there's no I don't know what the word is. There's no abstraction between what you're typing and what the CPU is doing.
It's literal translation.
And so you have to know the hardware you're developing for. There's no abstraction layer, so you're developing for the Motorola 68000 on the Sega Genesis, or the Ricoh, whatever the Ricoh is on the Super Nintendo, and you have to know, okay, I have this much, texture memory here, I have this much, the audio processor has this much memory, and my cartridge is this much. But I was thinking about it, I saw that on the rundown, and if you think about, like, the Nintendo had like 2 kilobytes of RAM, right? And it was an 8-bit processor, so 2 kilobytes of RAM. There's only like 200 places you can store something, and you can basically memorize that. So it seems like so daunting if you're into coding at all, but you can basically memorize and have in your brain. You can almost
simulate it in your mind.
You can have it. It was so small that you could essentially have the entire language and the entire hardware memorized, and you could think, what do I want to do? And you're thinking, I want to take this memory and load this file into it because it wants to play this way. It was so much simpler. And if you think about 2 kilobytes of memory, it's not that much. You could have that in your brain.
And
all your addressing and everything, it's just not much of it, so you can have it in your brain.
This is a memory for me. Like, literally, I had the TI-99 4A computer/gaming system. We would program games. We'd pull out the basic book and plug up the cassette recorder to it, and literally it was like line by line, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and you miss something, 21, and it was all literal, man. And
So where did you go? Because obviously, Moore's law, it gets exponentially more and more complicated, and to where eventually you can't keep that all in your brain.
So
you
what
can't
I was
simulate the
going to say,
console.
so what I was going to say is, Nintendo 64 is probably where it got so complicated that they had to have large-scale development environments. They had to send out, development kits and stuff like that, and that was a huge jump in complexity. Even the size of the ROMs went from a ROM for a cartridge in Super Nintendo was 32 megabits, and I think there was a couple like 48 megabit ROMs, but most of them were 32 megabits, which when you go to download that off of the ROM hacking site where you're trying to dodge all the viruses and the porn and everything, it's 32 divided by 8 is like, what's 32 divided by 8? 4 megabytes.
Yeah.
And, a lot of ROMs, I don't know if you do a lot of downloading of ROMs, they're 3 or 4 megabytes. Because that's how big they were.
That's the whole game,
right?
Yeah.
Well, they went straight to 64 megabytes with the Nintendo 64. Like, those two numbers not the same, but 32 and 64 megabytes is how big the cartridges were in the Nintendo 64. So they just, right then, they just exploded in size. And that wasn't even close to big enough because the PlayStation went to 400 or 800 megabytes. So that's when that became, you don't have it in your head anymore.
Yeah.
Tatted Mama XOXO says hi, Sam.
Hey, Lydia, how are you?
Hey, Tatted Mama.
I totally forgot to put it on my I was going to be here, and I did, and apparently people are seeing that I'm here. So
something I wanted to talk about last week, or maybe a couple weeks ago, but that we didn't really get into, that this kind of segues really nicely into is like the advent of middleware, where there's whole cottage industries that build the engines that then other people build games on.
Affinity and Unreal.
How long has that been a thing? I remember Scum Engine games, the LucasArts games, the point-and-click adventure games.
Oh, my God.
I remember Scum Engine being a thing, right?
Yeah.
So the LucasArts, they had that game engine. If you remember in school, I'm sure had this in school. In school, we learned Visual Basic and QBasic. So during that time,
we learned Basic.
Well, maybe for you, we learned Visual Basic, or maybe not even Visual Basic. Maybe it was QBasic.
We learned QBasic. Yes.
But go ahead.
We had typing actually. I didn't learn
on a typewriter.
Yeah, it was typewriter.
I took typing 3 semesters in middle school, and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah,
to this day, I can type fast because I got the short straw and got typing from my electives.
Oh, your electives. But
I'm glad I did, because now I can type so fast.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in that time period, there were people casually writing programs. Like you said, you casually wrote games, and not a lot of people, but nerds would write programs to do things they wanted to do. It's like you might write a program to do something for work. And so what?
I just realized that I have not recorded any of
Well,
this.
set the record on.
No, it's gonna be fine. I'll get it off.
Get it off the stream.
So I have my multi-track all set up, and
You were just excited that I was here. That's all it is.
Yep.
You know.
The earliest sort of middleware was Visual Basic and QBasic, and those I think you would consider that a high level programming language because you're not speaking machine language.
Yeah.
It takes something that's easy to communicate in English to the process to the code, and then there's an assembler which converts that to machine code. So those were the first kind of middlewares. And then you had very simple game engines like you talked about, like the Scum engine, where it's basically one company and they design all their games using the same engine. Like I talked about in the last couple weeks ago, I talked about all the Baldur's Gate games being on that, I don't remember, maybe it was Infinity or whatever was the name of that engine, but so that was still within one company. But now we have the Unreal Engine, and they sell the heck out of that thing to everybody. Like we have a event design, like light and sound design program that we have like a freeware of, and it has an Unreal Engine plugin where you can like do your design and then you can load it in the Unreal Engine and get
One even take it one step further now. Like I was on Humble the other day, Humble Bundle, and they sell packs of just like, oh, you need this many, like various people or whatever.
just assets. Rocks or
it's like
post-apocalyptic
for Unreal Engine.
cityscape,
You know, it's like.
And so Unreal is now almost like a whole platform that I don't know who does Valve own that?
No, there may not be a trivia question about that later on.
Okay, who owns Unreal
Okay,
Engine?
So if you don't,
You gave me an answer not to try.
It's
Now
not
I'm
Valve.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Think of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Unity is another
Yeah,
big one.
right.
And then,
CryEngine is a big
Cry
one.
Engine, yeah.
And
So Halo just developed what's the one of Halo? What's the name of Halo?
there may or may not be a trivia question about
Okay.
that
Oh,
later,
okay.
so
Okay,
I'm not
well,
going to tell you the
yeah.
answer. So
And then, and I've noticed, as you know, I have you have kids and stuff too. Now they have more of a visual programming. Like there's some stuff that it's actually like put this box here, put that box there, and it's actually got coding within the boxes that creates the whatever you want to do with it. You know, it's
last thing I want to touch on before we go to trivia, because this is going to be a long episode, but it's great stuff, and so stick with us. But the last thing I want to touch on is now in the mod, we really haven't talked about PC gaming for pretty much this whole time. But now in the modern era, it's a lot more obvious that that's just a PC in a box. Like those consoles, they're running on off-the-shelf stuff. I mean, there's probably they're custom developed, but they're like, when do we end up with just they're all PCs?
They didn't diverge. They converged. You're talking about
right.
consoles and
Yeah.
PCs.
Yeah.
They converged.
And so where do we go from here? Like they're all like they're the same thing. And
well, and look at the Xbox. Well, even PS5, the Xbox Series X, and a PC. Everything's cross-platform now. It's whatever. It's not about separating. It's just getting more people to play the games together. So if you feel more comfortable sitting on a couch with a controller, more power to you. My main gaming when I actually got serious in gaming was on a PC. You know, so
That's the way we were too. We were both.
and I love
we were a lot of PCs.
I do more casual gaming. Like I want to do party games on a console or like co-op games on a console because I like
Couch
to sit
co-op,
and play like that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm on a PC.
And from a development standpoint, you can make the argument that, well, you can optimize your game a lot better if you know the hardware everybody's going to play it on.
Yep.
But if you don't know the hardware everybody's going to play it on, their hardware is going to determine how their experience of that game. And it kind of got. I think that was kind of one of the differentiating factors. Is it seems like developers would put stuff on console, even if it was cross-platform on console. It was either console or PC. But now in the last few years, now it's mobile. Mobile, PlayStation, Xbox. Switch is kind of off on their own because they're Nintendo, but you're just as likely to see the same game on every single platform.
Yeah, and honestly, I remember the biggest thing that I can remember back in the day when it's like, because I was a PC guy, was the GameCube. It had an ATI graphics card.
That's right. Okay, that's right. Yeah, that's probably
You
the
know.
first big PC name that went into
Into a console, yeah.
Lewis just saying my mic has an echo. I'm sorry. We tested everything. If it's not working,
We're just getting so fired up and talking louder.
Yeah, it could be just we're talking louder. We've got 3 mics in here, so okay.
So I was going to mention on the when they converged. I don't know if y'all remember this. Maybe not. The so PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 were all kind of different than their competitors. PlayStation 3 had an 8-core, a very strange 8-core CPU with like kind of weak cores, and Xbox 360 had a 3-core CPU. At that time, they were still totally different. But then PS4 and Xbox One, AMD CPU, AMD GPU.
Yep.
The big difference was like how fast does the RAM run? Like that was the big difference.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
one of them had more cache and one of them had faster RAM.
RAM, yep.
And then you have Xbox Series X and PS5, and the difference is like one of them is like goes this way, and one of them is like goes this way. Like
yeah.
it's like there is no difference.
Yeah.
It's like there's absolutely no difference.
I want to say were we actually at one of the convention talking about the iterations of the Xbox Series X, Series S, all stuff like that, and like one of the previous generation was that the Xbox Series X is faster than the Xbox Series
Okay,
S.
so
Yeah.
an Xbox Series X is fast. No, an Xbox One
X,
One
yes,
X.
that's yes.
is faster than Xbox Series S.
S, yeah.
Right, but the Series S does have the super fast hard drive, the M2 hard drive.
Yeah.
So I did for The Witcher 3 on my Xbox One X. I spent like 3 days taking the hard drive out, putting an SSD in to my One X, so The Witcher would load faster.
Yeah.
So the Series S is a little bit slower graphically, but it does have that super fast hard drive. M2.
It's almost like, what are you guys doing? Talking about Xbox, you got the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X, the Xbox Series S, and the Xbox Series X. That all came out within a matter of just 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's like, what are y'all doing other than making 5 or 6 different levels of PCs based on the budget the person has?
That's all they're doing.
And that's all they're doing.
All
Exactly
they're
what
doing,
they're
right?
doing.
So it's just
And they
like,
could not name them any worse. One of my
couldn't
yeah.
possibly name them any
One of my
worse.
favorite memes is it's a box. It's a box, and it says box, and then they put an Xbox in, and it says Xbox in a
Xbox
box, and then it
box,
says a box of Xboxes, and then it says like boxes of Xbox.
Yeah.
It's like
Xboxes of Xboxes.
so unbelievably terrible naming scheme. The only thing worse than a
Microsoft
naming scheme
is the Windows.
Is I was gonna say that like the Intel has been really, really good about naming their CPUs for 20 years. It's just like a number, and the number goes up one every year. AMD was a total disaster, and now AMD has GPUs and CPUs with the same name. It's like,
Yeah.
did you not know?
6900 is a CPU.
It's like
And a
the
GPU,
guy that
yeah.
came up with the Xbox One X name. First of all, did you not know that it was called Xbox when you decided to add X
At the
one
end of
X
it.
to the end? Then the guy that said Series X. It's like, did you not know that the guy right before you just named this thing Xbox One X, and now you're going to name it Xbox Series X? It's like such nonsense. I don't understand how they get away with it. And this is major, major, major budgets that go into this.
All right. So last thing before we move on, we're gonna go to. I'm gonna start getting ready for trivia. In the meantime, y'all talk about Lewis's question. Was it Lewis that asked the question about Pilot
Oh,
Wings?
yeah. Do you remember Pilot Wings?
We talked about Pilot Wings.
I think I remember Pilot Wings. The first Pilot Wings I remember is actually the arcade Pilot Wings. Was that a thing or not?
No,
No,
this is on
Pilot,
Super
Pilot
Nintendo.
Wings was
Well,
a
I remember
Nintendo first-party game, and it was actually a launch title for the SNES.
Was it?
We talked about 2 weeks ago, I think, or maybe we talked about the launch titles.
It was a launch title?
Super Mario World, Pilot Wings, SimCity,
Yeah, that's right.
F-Zero,
Yeah.
See,
and R-Type 3.
Was it?
Yep, that was the
You
launch
went and
titles.
looked them up?
Yeah. So Pilot Wings, while I'm getting ready for trivia, your favorite era?
I do have a copy of Pilot Wings 64, but have I ever
They were
played
very
it?
similar.
Yeah. Pilot Wings 64 didn't have the magic, I don't think, that Pilot Wings did. So Eric, favorite
Favorite. I'm gonna say I remember playing with the rocket belt the most, but I think probably because I think you got that earlier. The hang glider was like at the end of the game. You had to unlock the hang glider.
And I remember seeing the hang.
Yeah.
That's what sticks in my mind.
And so in my
I think you
head-
had to pass the other ones at a certain level
And so
before
in my
you could
head,
get hang glider.
because of that was like the pinnacle of the game, and the challenge was the highest with the hang glider. I think the hang glider is probably my favorite.
Yeah.
Pilot Wings had Mode 7, like the entire thing with
The whole
Mode
entire
7.
game
All
was
this
Mode
was this.
It was like the game that and F-Zero both were like this is
I like
an
F-Zero.
advertisement for.
Hey, they have
SNES
F-Zero
Mode 7.
99. Have you played F-Zero 99?
I have not.
Okay, this is so casual. You should do it too. F-Zero 99 for Nintendo Switch. It's identical to F-Zero. Instead of 4 players, 99.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes, sir.
It's chaotic.
It's a battle royale
and it's
on a
a
racetrack.
Nintendo first party. You get it for the Switch.
Okay.
They have online multiplayer, and it's mass chaos. It's F-Zero, but mass chaos. Part of the game is staying alive through the game, and like
Yeah.
if you finish in like the top 15, like you're doing really good. And
Oh, wow.
like every game has 99 racers. Now they may get like 50 humans, and then it'll be computers that fill it in.
Yeah,
But it doesn't look like SNES F-Zero.
Just
does it?
like it.
It's
Are you
F-Zero
serious?
from
Like
SNES?
SNES.
Just like it. I mean,
Yeah,
it
okay.
just
Oh,
like
wow.
now we play these emulated games with smoothing and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
probably got some.
Yeah, some polish to
Yes,
it, but it's
yeah.
still.
But I mean, it looks indistinguishable from your memory of F-Zero,
Are the
but with 99 cars on the track.
are
sounds
the
awesome.
are the tracks bigger?
No.
Oh my
Is
god!
it the same track?
99
Yes.
people on that little bitty track. Good
Yes.
God.
Yes.
Okay.
Tracks
All right,
are not
well,
bigger.
That sounds awesome. I'm definitely gonna go do
F-Zero
that.
99. Y'all should go.
F-Zero 99.
If
Yeah,
you're in the
we're gonna
stream,
do an
download
F-Zero
F-Zero
99 tournament. They did the same thing for Tetris 99 and Super Mario 99. Shade says.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's trivia time, and so it's Eric versus Dustin versus any guest we have. So Dustin's not here. We didn't talk about him any, but he's off playing Dungeons and Dragons. But this is going to be Eric versus Sam versus the Discord.
Oh.
So we're going to do it. I got a bunch of good questions to try to kill the downtime. Y'all not gonna write your answer down. I'm gonna ask the question. You're gonna shout out your answer.
Shout it out. But
all
you
right?
only get one shout.
So you can only shout out one answer. You can't go back and shout out like a second answer. So
Can I use Google?
no, well, yeah, you can if the other guy doesn't know it.
Yeah.
But I'm probably not gonna let you go that long. So
I'll just bow down to him right now. So.
all right. So here we go. Here's how this is set up now. The Wheel of Destiny is the decades of history, and most of these questions are about the game hardware. They're not like all just like.
Oh, so the hardware stuff. Yeah,
it's hardware
yeah,
focused.
I concede to Eric already.
Well, let's just see what happens. You might do better than you think.
Oh,
So,
I'll have an answer, but
let's
it
see
may
what the
not
Wheel
be
of
nowhere
Destiny
near the correct thing.
1980s. This is your time, Sam.
Okay, yeah.
So let me see. E, S, and D. Okay, so
for Discord.
first question from the 1980s. Which side-scrolling shooter was released in arcades in 1981 and later found new life in being paired with Joust on a Game Boy port?
Golden Axe.
No. Side-scrolling shooter.
Side-scrolling shooter released in arcades and then it was in
Galaga.
1981. Side-scrolling.
Side-scrolling.
Contra.
No,
Defender.
but Defender.
Defender.
Oh, Defender and Joust.
That sounds familiar.
It did. That was a Game Boy Advance game.
Yeah,
Defender
Yeah.
and Joust.
Yeah.
Defender Joust is how I was thinking. Y'all
But see,
might
to me,
do it.
and I don't think of Defender as a side-scrolling shooter, but it is because it's a loops. But you know.
Yeah. All right, where we going now? We're going to the 2000s.
Yeah, well,
It'll be fine. You remember on
Conan
Conan
O'Brien.
the year 2000.
what Titan of the arcade and console markets announced in 2001 that it would no longer produce hardware to
Sega.
continue to function? I think Eric got that first, but we're going to call that one a tie because that was super close. They both answered it before the question was finished. So that's going to be 1-1, Eric and Sam. Let's go to the next question. Move through this quickly. 2000s again. What game did Microsoft use to launch itself into the home console
Halo.
market? What?
Halo.
That's correct.
Oh, I got destroyed. I'll get destroyed.
What game? He got it on what game did Microsoft use to launch itself in the console market?
I was
I guess if I was
Simulator.
really, really to be clear, I would need to say
Evolution
to be-
Evolved.
to be more
Combat Evolved.
Combat
to be more
Evolved, yeah.
specific.
Halo
Yeah,
Combat Evolved.
All right.
yeah.
Props to
Halo
Sam.
Combat
I just
Evolved.
didn't have.
Sam
I knew.
destroyed
I
him
would
in
have
the
known it.
2000s.
I just didn't have time to compute it.
Hey, that's the game. That's the name of the game. This.
Got to recalibrate for speed.
All right, 2010s. Recalibrate for speed.
Uh-oh.
What is the name of the game engine that was developed by 343 Industries from the ground up for Halo
Slipspace.
Infinite? Eric gets that one. Eric gets Slipspace engine. We talked about it earlier, but we didn't say the name. This is fun. I like doing it this way.
It is more. It is more fun.
It's intense. 1970s.
Ooh, this might need to be
All right,
Sam.
here we go. 1970s. What is the name of the first commercial arcade video game which hit the market in October 1971, a little over a year before Pong in the arcades?
We just talked about it.
The first ever commercial arcade
Space
video game.
Paranoids. No, it's not Space Paranoids. Oh my God!
I think Sam might kind of know it.
I can see the cabinet.
All right. Anybody in the Discord know this one?
Centipede?
Nope, it's not Centipede. The game is called Computer Space. And it also was called Space War.
Space War. Okay.
Space War.
I can see the cabinet.
Once
It's like-
it came, the same exact game got ported to consoles called Space War.
Okay, good job.
I did not know that. I looked it up. All right, moving right along.
Are people playing in Discord?
That's a nobody get that one. I don't see
Nobody's playing in Discord.
nobody's playing in
So
Discord.
it's just us.
Yeah, it's
It's just us. All right.
2010s
2010s again. All right, let's go down to the 2010s. Here we go. What game developer defended their use of always-on DRM during their mostly single-player games launch by claiming falsely that the game mechanics required access to cloud computing? What did you say? Blizzard. It's not the game developer. It's the game.
Diablo.
It's not Diablo.
Okay, I don't know then.
They did it too. It was a super bad launch because
Then
of
I know
DRM.
the other one.
This one is specifically because they said
I know it.
They said
wanna take a guess?
it was,
Okay.
it was launched DOA because they said that it required access to cloud computing
game?
to run the game.
SimCity.
SimCity.
Oh,
yeah.
SimCity.
The
Yeah.
re-release of
2013,
SimCity was a
yeah.
complete disaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give him that
SimCity
one.
2013, and then no, I'm not giving him that one. He said
No, you only get one guess.
Okay.
and the Diablo 3 launch, total disaster.
Oh, that
because
was-
of DRM.
Yeah.
But they just said, hey, you know what, we're sorry.
Yeah.
SimCity said, well, the game has to talk to the cloud.
No, it
It has to
doesn't.
use cloud
And
computing.
then 2 years later, they turned off the
then-
cloud computing.
And then,
part.
yeah, right. And then they eventually said, no, it doesn't. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it doesn't actually require cloud computing at all. So here, let's see what we got. It's interesting if we hit 2010s a whole bunch because I do feel like this wheel is weighted. Back to the 1970s. What American video game developer and publisher moved from manufacturing into the interactive entertainment industry in 1973, delivering blockbuster franchises like Mortal Kombat Cruisin' and
Midway.
Jam?
That's a tie.
That's a tie. Yep. All right. Good job. Lewis says, hey, SimCity was a classic. Reeked of EA, the original one. We're talking about this. SimCity was every game awesome until SimCity
2000,
SimCity 3000, SimCity 4. Those are all awesome games.
I still break open SimCity 4 sometimes.
Yeah.
I have a video on Facebook like recently of me playing SimCity and my cat is trying to click stuff.
Yeah. SimCity 4 is the
I was
one where you
playing
had
SimCity 4.
really, really tight integration across your region.
Yeah.
Where you could literally build houses in one little section
And
then
jobs
your-
in the other.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
SimCity 4 was a great game. Okay,
Mm.
2000s. What? Oh wait, no, we already did that one. What did Microsoft? No, we already did that one. What is the best-selling video game console of all time, having sold
PlayStation 2.
155? Eric gets that one. 155 million.
Fix me Nintendo Switch though.
You think? Yeah. The big thing, and what made the PlayStation 2 sell so many is it was great. Also, they made it for 13 years.
Yep.
They produced that console for 13
Shade, you
years.
were wrong, man. It was
Yeah.
PlayStation 2.
PlayStation 2, no doubt.
What did he
not
said?
even close.
SNES? No, not even close.
Only
yeah.
the Nintendo Switch is going to get close.
Yeah,
It might
the
be.
SNES was like
Well, the
40
PlayStation 2,
million or
yeah,
something,
there
not
was
even close.
it so many years.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, this is high intensity trivia. It's like where it's at.
Yeah.
Okay. Give us something we haven't seen yet, Will of Destiny.
2010s.
All right. What 10-year-old game which could run on a potato, according to Tom's Hardware,
Doom.
received RTX ray tracing support in 2020?
Minecraft.
Yes, that is correct. Instantly becoming a standard, a benchmarking standard, able to bring even the most bleeding edge PC to its knees.
My bad.
Minecraft RTX is you can get 1 frame per second
Yep.
on the
See, I
on
was,
the
and I was
4090.
I was going that you could put it on anything like Doom.
Yeah.
They
Will it-
put it on
will
the
it
phone.
run
Yeah, will it
Doom?
run
Yeah.
Doom? Yeah.
Yeah. Or actually, Run Doom on it is the meme.
Yeah.
Will it run Crisis? But Run Doom on it is
Run
like,
Doom on.
Oh,
try to
Crisis,
get your,
yeah.
can your microwave run.
That's
Doom on
right.
it?
Try to get your
Oh, we
vacuum.
got a
cleaner.
90s.
Okay, 1990s. Woo, woo, woo! Alert, 1990s. What is the name of the SNES graphics mode that allows a
Mode 7.
background layer to be rotated? Mode 7 is the famous. Yep, including to illustrate the illusion of a 2D texture map plane. in
Take a
3D
background and rotate it
Rotate
like
it,
this,
yeah.
and then do all this stuff with it.
space. Yep. And it wasn't just it was
As
scan
opposed
line
to a
by
sprite.
scan line,
So-
which
right.
is what allowed it to do this because you would
Yep.
do first scan line at 50%, the second scan line at 51%, and that's what made. But it also could do tiling and rotating and scaling.
So the different modes is like there'll be a mode where it was like one background layer that can translate and it can play 10 sprites.
Yeah.
Or one background layer that never moves and you can have a whole bunch of sprites. That was the different modes.
What's the
And
based on
mode-
processing power
Mode
and
7. Well, it was actually the CPU had to be able to switch into that mode.
Yeah.
And it's like that. It was that tightly attached to the hardware.
All right, 2000s.
the year 2000.
Yep. What franchise holds the Guinness World Record for most expansion packs for a video
World
game
of Warcraft.
series? That's not correct. It's not even close when you think when you realize.
Oh,
Sims.
I know what it is. Yeah, it's the Sims, no doubt. Yeah. I can't believe that.
It has like 75.
Well, because they're all these
expansion
little,
packs.
like, not huge expansion. Like, wow.
Like, oh,
Lewis-
let's put hairstyles,
Yeah.
and that's an expansion.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, Lewis
Got that one. Lewis is back. 2010s. I think this might be my last 2010s question. What gaming company licenses out its Unreal Engine for use by developers from across the industry?
So I said Valve. It wasn't Valve.
It wasn't
so
Valve.
It wasn't Valve.
Who owns Unreal?
owns
Simple.
Unreal?
I'm kind of channeling my Trivial Pursuit in the way I write these questions. But the question is, who owns Unreal?
Oh, Valve owns Steam.
Valve owns Steam.
Yeah.
So
Who owns Unreal? Come on, Lewis. You know this, man.
All right. When the wheel spins, the question's over. Question's over.
What is
Epic Games.
Oh,
okay,
Epic.
Epic,
Yep.
yeah.
Epic
Epic
launcher.
owns it.
God, dog.
That's all the 2010s questions.
So now it's Corey picks. When it's 2010, you just
Okay,
pick.
here's a wild card and I pick. Okay. Which of the three developers, this is 2000s if you're listening, which of the three developers who currently rotate to fulfill COD's annual release cadence developed the original Call of Duty
Ricochet.
game in 2003?
I don't know. That's
Ricochet.
one. That's one of them.
Nope. Ricochet is their anti-cheat.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Third party. Third party that does.
Man,
their,
I used to know him. I don't even know if I even know him anymore. Treyarch.
Lewis says Activision. That's publisher. That's
Yeah.
not the developer. Treyarch is one of the three. It's not the right one.
I already
Is
answered.
Sledgehammer one of them?
Sledgehammer's one of them. It's not the right one.
So
I got two of them, and it's not
You
that
got two
one.
of them. And you
it's the
missed
third. It's the
third
one he didn't say.
Yeah.
It is Infinity Ward.
Infinity Ward.
Infinity
okay.
Ward, yeah.
Now what you're saying.
Infinity Ward has developed the original Call of Duty. But to keep the money flowing in,
The
fast
next
enough-
answer is Naughty Dog.
I don't know.
Dude, they make some good games. That's
2000s.
bangers only.
Oh, I don't have any 2000s questions either.
Corey picks.
All right, Corey picks the category. We're gonna do 1990s. What console was shifted in mid-development to be the first primarily 3D-focused hardware after its developers saw the success of Virtua Fighter in arcades?
Sega. Wait. Sorry.
Which
What?
console was the first primarily 3D rendered?
Nintendo
console?
64.
No.
No, it was the Sega Saturn.
Nope.
No.
Anybody in the chat got it? Dreamcast?
Dreamcast.
Nope. It was the Sony PlayStation.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep. So nobody
See, I
gets
was
that
thinking
one.
Virtual Fighter was on the Sega.
Sony PlayStation was released before Nintendo. That's right. Nintendo
Yes.
64 had a very long release. Like
Yeah.
when Nintendo Ultra 64 was coming. It was coming.
Coming, yeah. 1990s. What studio publisher's abandonment of its so far exclusive relationship with Nintendo in the mid 90s
Squaresoft.
was that
We
is
were
correct.
talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
this is
like,
interesting. Was mostly rest of the question was mostly related to Nintendo's failure to develop a CD-ROM.
oh wait, this is a
Yes.
competition. I'm sitting here just
Yeah.
like.
No, it's a race. You got to hit it. You
I mean,
gotta
I'm
get it.
like, he knows this.
Well,
The,
you destroyed me on Halo.
what I found out from researching that I thought was very interesting is, I was talking earlier about Nintendo really kind of being gangsta a little bit in the 90s. I mean, well, yeah, we're talking about Nintendo being gangsta in the 90s. When Squaresoft said, look, we're not doing this if you don't give us a CD-ROM, one of the Nintendo executives is on the record, recorded, saying, never come back. To a Square
Okay.
executive.
Okay.
Pretty strong. Never come back. Don't you leave and don't come back. That's pretty strong. Lewis says you guys should get buzzers to guess the answers. We could totally do that. Now that we see that it's kind of fun doing it fast paced like this, we could totally do buzzers.
You could probably have a buzzer in the Discord too.
When they make two different sounds. Like
Yeah.
one of them is a cow mooing and the other one is a chicken clucking or whatever, so that the people at home can hear. Okay, in 1980s. What arcade game was the highest grossing title of the 1980s, with an inflation-adjusted coin drop revenue
Pac-Man.
of Pac-Man is correct.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Good guess.
19 billion.
Billion. Yep.
$19 billion.
That's a lot of quarters.
Pac-Man brought in quarters in the 1980s.
But see, and I
That
want to
is
know, was it just
approximately-
Pac-Man or was it like Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man because it's the same?
No,
set?
in the chart that I found, it was by
By
gross.
actual game.
So just
It
for
was by
reference,
game.
that's-
Miss Pac-Man was on there also.
That's 76 billion quarters,
yeah, that's a lot of quarters.
right? It was $19 billion. 76 billion
Yeah,
quarters.
Yep. Okay, what console? This is our last. We're running out of questions, so it's probably about time to wrap this up anyway. But this 1990s question, we'll do like 2 more. It's very close, actually.
Yeah.
Very close.
I'm up on you about
It's
2.
7-5. Which console was the first to feature an analog thumbstick on its control?
PlayStation 1.
No.
The Bally's Astrocade.
Who?
Bally's Astrocade.
An analog thumbstick?
Oh, it's an analog big stick.
Yeah, it's not a digital D-pad. It's not a digital plus.
I think
minus.
PlayStation had analog
Thumbstick.
stick. I think PlayStation had, well, before PlayStation? It's older than PlayStation?
PlayStation
1. Older than PlayStation
1.
1?
NES had some.
Okay,
No, it's just digital, though.
Oh, digital. Okay, you're thinking, yeah. see, I'm
Analog
thinking-
thumbstick
An
meaning it
analog
has a
thumbstick.
series of, all the different directions,
Yeah.
not just a D-pad or anything that just seemed like a stick but it was really a D-pad.
so this trivia question says N64.
Well, it had the
But
one
the
that
PlayStation
came
came
out
out before
first.
that, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, this is what happened, though. The analog sticks probably came out way
Oh,
later.
the original PlayStation did not have analog sticks.
Right, but later
did-
on they
but
had
in-
controllers that had an analog button,
stick, yeah.
But they had a button that turned on the analog stick, but that was probably way later.
Yeah.
So it probably wasn't
Plus
until
the 64.
N64. So nobody gets that right.
like
Let's
the
do-
PlayStation came out first, but
Yeah.
it didn't release with an analog
that-
stick.
yeah.
I mean, it had a stick,
Yeah.
but it was just eight directions,
Yeah.
probably, or 4, maybe 4.
Okay, last question.
Well, it doesn't really matter which one.
19. No, we're gonna have to just go find a category that I have a
Question. for you.
question left in. I don't know. Do we have any questions left? 1970s. What famous golden age of arcade games title made use of the Quadra-Scan vector graphics hardware, which was originally developed for fellow golden age game Lunar Lander? So what game used the same hardware as
Vector
Lunar
graphics
Lander?
hardware. I'm gonna say that Star Wars line game.
Quantum.
I guess. What?
Quantum?
Asteroids.
Asteroids. Okay.
Asteroids is the answer to
No,
that
I got it.
one.
Are there any left?
There are no questions left. That is all the trivia questions I have for us tonight.
Eric
So,
beat me.
Sam, thanks so much for joining us, man. Appreciate having you here.
Please have
It's
me
been
back
great.
anytime.
We will definitely have you back sometime. Do you have any parting thoughts?
Meow.
He has a friend that was a game developer in the 80s and 90s, and he'll get him on the screen later.
Yeah,
Actually, I
that'd
got
be
a couple
awesome.
of them, yeah.
Totally want to do that. Eric, any other parting thoughts?
No, I could have talked about just like the we had a D20 last week was like D20 week. I could have talked about it for at least 16 hours.
Well, I think-
Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64. I could talk about that for at least 16 hours.
I think what we'll do is we'll just keep drilling deeper. Like we did D20 RPGs, but we didn't mention JRPGs at all. You know, and like tonight we talked about the history of consoles. We didn't all talk about the history of PC gaming at all. So I think we can just keep digging into these historical
But
things.
see, then I'm an action RPG guy, you know.
Action RPG.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Okay, that yawn, that's a big old yawn.
Oh, it was.
That to me means it's time to wrap this thing up. Thank you guys for watching if you're watching live. If you're listening on your podcast app of choice, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for buying cars at Lake Charles Toyota. Thank you for coming to Scion Esports events. And as always, most of all, thank you. God, I'm fixing to die. Thank you guys for listening to the Scion Esports, the Founders Podcast.